Miriam.
Little loud.
Yes. Yeah. Screen. Okay, and a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening as well to all of you joining us from different parts of the world. On behalf of the Wildlife Institute of India and its Category 2 Center for World Natural Heritage Management and Training for the Asia and Pacific region under the auspices of UNESCO, it is my pleasure to welcome all the guests and participants to this webinar on disaster and world heritage with focus on pandemics. Our partners for this event, I would like to acknowledge are the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, Vienna, and Maxar Technologies, the US and Singapore based. Of course, that we are talking today, the immediate context is, of course, COVID-19. But the intent of our interaction today is, of course, to look at it from a much wider perspective of impact, mitigation, risk reduction, as well as the tools that we have in our hands to help address these kind of circumstances. And as you can see us on the screen, there are an esteemed panel of speakers that we have lined up today. We have two key addresses at the beginning. That is by Dr. Mekhtil Roessler, Director, UNESCO World Heritage Center, and Dr. Dhananjay Mohan, Director, the Wildlife Institute of India in Dehradun. Our other esteemed panel of speakers include Dr. Shirish Ravan, who is part of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs in Australia, Dr. Rohit Jigyasu, Project Manager with ICROM in Rome, Dr. Shikha Jain, Conservation Architect and Director of DRONA in India, Dr. Sonali Ghosh, who is the Deputy Inspector General of the Central Zoo Authority, Government of India. There's Dr. Abhineet Jain, who is Lead Global Industry Business Development for Maxar Technologies and based in Singapore. And Dr. Gautam Talukdar, who is the Faculty in Charge for the Wildlife Institute Category 2 Center. I hope we all on board together with this. So my name is Neeraj Kakoti, and I'm from the Wildlife Institute of India Category 2 Center. I'll be moderating this program over the next 60 minutes or so. I request all your support and cooperation. I might add that it is an interesting coincidence that today, 22nd of May, happens to be the International Day for Biological Diversity. And yesterday was actually the World Day for Cultural Diversity and Dialogue. And in fact, just over a month ago to this date, was the International Day for Monuments and Sites on 18th April. So a common thread that runs through all these events, you can see is that World Heritage is very uniquely relevant to all these commemorative days, as well as the issues and the objectives that these events ultimately seek to implement. Thank you, everybody. And before we commence the actual proceedings, please allow me to make the standard housekeeping announcements for our speakers as well as for the overall participants. I would request that everybody may kindly keep their microphones muted and their video switched off. Any comments or questions that you may have may be kindly sent through the chat option, and we'll take it up for consideration towards the end of the webinar. And as a disclaimer, hope you'll all kindly bear with us for any technical issues during the delivery of this webinar. We hope to resolve it at the earliest if there are any issues. So thank you. And as regards the theme of this webinar, while COVID is surely the immediate context and we want to take it into a wider perspective, in this context, we are now ready with our keynote speaker, Dr. Mekhtil Roessler, who is Director of the UNESCO World Heritage Center, headquartered in Paris. So an expert in both cultural and natural heritage, Dr. Roessler has spent about 3 decades with UNESCO, serving in various capacities. And she has also published and co-authored numerous books and articles on heritage as well. With this short introduction, may I call upon Dr. Mekhtil Roessler to please deliver her opening address.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for inviting us to such an interesting webinar. I have a very small PowerPoint, so if Neeraj can put it up on disasters and World Heritage. So next slide, please. Many World Heritage sites have been affected by disasters. For example, we had the bushfires in Australia, as you know, many fires at World Heritage sites. with Notre Dame, or the Milo Church in Haiti. As you may have seen, we had floods in the historic cities like in Venice in Italy, or just recently at Sanaa in Yemen. If you can move to the next slide, please. And we had hurricanes and storms like the one in Vanuatu, and just recently Cyclone Amphan. So we don't know yet whether the Sundarbans have been affected, so it would be interesting for us. And we had oil spills in the Solomon Islands or the Galapagos. All of this happened in 2019, 2020. Next slide, please. But if we look at our publication, Managing Disaster Risks, which we organized with our advisory bodies, ICOMOS, ICCROM, and IUCN, you wonder whether the pandemics have been included. And we checked it with our colleagues, and actually epidemics have been included, but marginally. They are mentioned only 10 times. And that is something we really need to look at. Now, if you look at the COVID crisis, next slide, please, you can see our global map. This is our last update from earlier this week. This unprecedented crisis affected World Heritage Sites globally. And we had up to 90% of countries had closed their World Heritage Sites partially or fully. And that had serious impacts, including socioeconomic impacts at the sites, because there were no entry fees, and it seriously impacted the livelihoods of people and communities living in and around these sites. It had also serious impacts on monitoring. For example, we went through satellite monitoring or drone monitoring for those closed sites, but also for logging and poaching at natural sites. And with corona, as it's a zoonotic disease, this is very critical for our primates, especially our mountain gorillas and orang-utans and bonobos, because they are vulnerable to SARS or COVID. And on the positive side, we got a lot of videos from our site managers. They want to share their experiences. And we had a number of sites which used remote access, virtual tours to sites. We had a live screening from Ngorongoro, for example. So that was also, the site managers were absolutely great because they used this opportunity in a different way. Next slide, please. And I would like to link the crisis, this crisis, to the other crisis, which is not only the biodiversity crisis, which we commemorate today also, but also the climate change impacts on World Heritage. We work with Rohit and Oscar on the update of our policy on climate change 13 years after the first policy was adopted. And we do that also differently, I want to share with you, because we do it online with connections from all parts of the world. So that's also a different way of working for ourselves. And next slide, please. We have also the strategy for risk reduction and its priority actions. Please move the slide. So I think we can have a more strengthened support for risk reduction with priority actions at the relevant global, regional, national levels. We need to also use knowledge, innovation, and education to build a culture of disaster prevention. I think you are still on the climate change slide. If you move to the risk reduction, okay, here we are. And we need to better identify, assess, and monitor disaster risks at World Heritage properties and reduce underlying risk factors. And that includes pandemics as well. I think all of this can be further developed. And I think we need to include lessons learned from the current COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. We are preparing with our colleagues from the ICCROM IUCN World Heritage Leadership Program, actually a new resource manual, which is managing disaster risks and climate change to build resilience in World Heritage and for World Heritage. And I think this will include the main principles. And as this is under preparation, this seminar is really, really helpful. The key point is to build resilience at the World Heritage Sites and with the communities living at these sites. Next slide, please. As you mentioned in your introduction, the big days, cultural diversity and biological diversity, I would also like to mention that the 13th of October is International Day for Disaster Reduction. If you move the slide, please. And this aims to promote a global culture of risk awareness and disaster reduction by celebrating how people around the world are reducing their exposure to disaster. And also, I think we can do this together in October. This global cooperation is a critical point for us at UNESCO, being a part of the UN system, but it's especially necessary for vulnerable sites and their communities like here in the Pacific. And with my last slide, of course, from a site in India. Next slide, please. That's from Kaziranga. We also today, we celebrate Biodiversity Day as well as yesterday cultural diversity. For us, biocultural diversity is a very critical concept. And we have also a panel online on nature solutions with our colleagues from the MAP program and the Oceanographic Commission. And I think this is very important, but also we collaborate with all 8 biodiversity related conventions today. So that's the day. And thank you very much for organizing the seminar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for providing this broad overview on the initiatives in disaster and World Heritage. I think it was a very informative presentation, and we continue to look forward further to the leadership provided by the World Heritage Center. Thank you, ma'am. We'll get back to you as we go on further. It is my privilege now to introduce Dr. Dhananjay Mohan, Director, Wildlife Institute of India, and Head of the Category 2 Center in Dehradun. Dr. Mohan is a senior officer of the Indian Forest Service with a very extensive management experience in planning and protected areas, as well as sound academic credentials in leading forestry and wildlife institutions of the country. He is a fellow of Leadership for Environment and Development, LEAD, Rockefeller Foundation, and has been a recipient of the Dr. Salim Ali Fellowship of the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Government of India. I now invite him to share his thoughts with us. So.
Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
You are audible. You can start the video.
Yeah. Right. A very good afternoon to all our esteemed panelists and everybody who's there online on this very important webinar on disaster and World Heritage with focus on pandemics. It could not have been more timely, and today's day is very special, the International Day of Biodiversity. And we are in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. And I think it was a wonderful idea, which was jointly taken forward by the Wildlife Institute of India Category 2 Center under the auspices of UNESCO, along with, of course, our UNESCO World Heritage Center and UN Office for Outer Space Affairs and other collaborators. So once again, I welcome all the esteemed panelists to this very important discussion that we are having already. Let me just explain how we are here, the Wildlife Institute of India. We set up this Category 2 Center about 4 years ago after there was a memorandum of understanding between the UNESCO and our Ministry of Environment and Forest. And this center had the mandate of to strengthen implementation of World Heritage Convention by building capacities of all professionals and bodies involved with World Natural Heritage in Asia Pacific through training, research, dissemination of information, and network building. I mean, to put it in more simple terms, we've been, ever since we were created, we've been involved in pushing this important agenda of natural World Heritage sites. And our mandate doesn't just get restricted to India, it is in the whole of Asia and Pacific region, with nearly 50 countries there, out of which 44 already have a World Heritage site, natural World Heritage site. So we've been gradually expanding our work and taking our work to other countries. Many of them have already started in getting involved in our programs, and we hope to take it forward, involving all the countries of the region. This is a region which is, I think, bestowed with a lot of biodiversity. It's very high on biodiversity, be it the Indonesian islands or the India's Northeast or the Southeast Asia. All these countries or regions are known for very high amount of biodiversity, which of course is threatened also. So we all know that World Heritage Convention actually tries to identify these sites with outstanding natural heritage. But even these sites are not free from any disaster. And so it's I would say it's more of relatively recent times that we have started talking about disaster planning. Otherwise, we were just on the mercy of the God when we dealt with disasters in the past. But now disaster mitigation and planning based on that is an integral part of even World Heritage sites. And gradually this area is also coming up, and it will definitely help in dealing with the security and long-term sustenance of our World Heritage sites, which are often, particularly when we talk about the natural World Heritage sites, these are also ecological benchmarks. And the whole world looks forward to these regions as important areas which will let us know how nature actually progresses when it is left largely undisturbed. So such areas have a very special value when it comes to protecting them from disasters. And this time of pandemics, well, on the face of it, we really do not relate pandemics to World Natural Heritage sites. But actually there is a linkage, and Dr. Osler had already hinted on some of those aspects. And of course, our esteemed panelists will discuss more about it. Frankly, it's not my area of expertise, but this is one area which I think needs to be taken with all the seriousness, and we look forward to some very important and interesting facts and suggestions coming out of this webinar as it proceeds further. So with these words, I would thank once again all our collaborators who have come together with us for organizing this webinar, and I look forward to a very, very interesting discussion later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing about the Wildlife Institute as well as the Category 2 Center and our mandate, and specifically about underlining the significance of conserving and protecting natural heritage sites, and the links that we are increasingly trying to find of how pandemics and natural heritage are related, what are the mitigation measures that can be taken for natural heritage, and of course, disaster risk planning for heritage sites as a very significant element should be of our entire planning process. Thank you so much, sir. Okay, everybody, we'll now open up the webinar to discuss key issues with our invited panel of experts. So we have, as I had already introduced briefly, and we'll now sort of take specific questions for particular panelists. And as I pose these questions, I would expect the panelists to respond accordingly. We have with us, first up, Dr. Shirish A. Ravan, who leads the United Nations Platform for Space-Based Information for Disaster Management and Emergency Response, UN-SPIDER, which is administered by the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs in Austria. With over 15 years of association with the United Nations, I would like to ask Dr. Ravan to shed more light on the key global agreement known as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. In fact, this is one of the more recent developments. And specifically, if Dr. Ravan, you could highlight what this concept of ecosystem-based DRR exactly is related to, natural heritage as well as pandemics. Dr. Ravan, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And greetings to everybody. And this is the new way of greeting worldwide now. So we are learning a lot of new habits in this pandemic. So I'm very glad to be with this esteemed panelist and the participants who are listening to us. Just to set the context of the discussions, I thought, okay, to display this particular slide. Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is the key framework followed by all the countries or disaster management authorities. And their all disaster management plans and strategies are basically aligned with the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Why I'm mentioning this? Because this agreement, this framework was negotiated for over 2 years from bottom to top, and then finally it was agreed in Japan in the third Disaster Risk Reduction Conference. And it has 4 priorities. So priority 1 and 3 prominently brings out the role of ecosystems in disaster risk reduction. It also brings out the use of geospatial information, evidence-based information, satellite images and all. But above all, it is highlighting the special scale ecosystems and the information on it. And priority 3 also brings out the similar thing: strengthen sustainable use and management of ecosystems. So Sendai Framework in 2015 has recognized the role of ecosystems very, very well. So when we are discussing this topic of the natural heritage and its role in pandemics, I think it is very important to refer to Sendai Framework, which has not failed to agree on role of ecosystem in disaster risk reduction. But pandemic did not happen before 2015. So therefore, probably Sendai Framework did not mention pandemic in the framework, but definitely in the next update of this framework, this will be a prominent issue. However, we should really reflect on how these particular natural sites help in controlling pandemics. Next slide, please. So as I said, Sendai Framework is recognizing importance of ecosystem, and it's a two-way. It's like a yin-yang sign, which you see in the center. So it's a complementary to each other. If you have robust ecosystems like mangroves, when cyclone comes and mangroves are there, the impact of cyclone on the nearby localities of mangroves is much, much less. So robust ecosystem always acts as a disaster risk reduction instrument. On the contrary, disaster risk reduction, if you apply that in the natural heritage sites, it will keep that ecosystem very, very robust. So these are the complementing things for each other. Next. So when we are talking of ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, I don't have to really highlight then these are the natural heritage sites, because most of the natural heritage sites identified worldwide are the ecosystems, are the forests predominantly also, and coastal ecosystems as well. So therefore, when I'm talking of ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, I'm also talking of role of natural heritage sites in disaster risk reduction. So the current motto is offered by Sendai Framework to all the countries is develop disaster resilience. As the director of Wildlife Institute said that previously we were at the mercy of destiny when disasters came, but we have the frameworks now. We are not thinking of responding to disasters when it comes, but we are thinking much earlier on early warning and mitigation and all, and above all, building disaster resilience. And we think of building disaster resilience, we think of resilient development, we think of how to mitigate climate change and cope up with the extremes that are coming because of climate change. And we are thinking of the most important part, ecosystems, how ecosystems play a role in disaster risk reduction or even combating the climate change. And that's how two important terminologies are now coming into practice, daily practice. This is ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction and ecosystem-based disaster risk adaptation. And immediately you can think of those disasters which can be mitigated if you use the natural sites as an instrument for disaster risk reduction. These are floods, droughts, slides, coastal hazards. They can be prevented or mitigated to a great extent if you have robust ecosystems or robust natural heritage sites. Next, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so given the 5 minutes, I have to quickly highlight how then Earth observation or space technology helps in really ensuring that ecosystems are robust, whether ecosystem will really act as an instrument for disaster risk reduction or not. It depends on so many parameters. It's not just presence of few trees or few ecosystem elements, but we really need to know, we need to assess the health of ecosystems. I'm not going to show satellite images or any Earth observation data at this stage because we have a colleague from Maxar who will probably show much beautiful satellite images. But at this stage, what I want to highlight that when you use Earth observation or space-based information, you can view the extent of ecosystem. How big is the ecosystem? Larger the ecosystem, you can have better eco-sensitive zoning and better biodiversity. You can monitor the composition of the ecosystems. How diverse are the ecosystems in terms of community, in terms of species, and all that. So you can monitor the biodiversity, its conditions of biodiversity, whether these ecosystems are fragmented or they are continuous or they are porous. So this kind of analysis can be done when you use the Earth observation data. You can even go a step ahead and understand how much is the potential of this ecosystem in terms of capturing the biomass or our role of ecosystems in carbon flux or global warming. If they are acting as a carbon sink, I think these ecosystems are much better in terms of preventing even disasters like risks like pollution also. So moment you have Earth observation or space technology available with you, you can understand basically indicators of health of ecosystem in a great way. And today remote sensing or Earth observation has advanced to such an extent that you can get very high resolution satellite image to the coarse satellite images that you can monitor a single ecosystems multiple times in a day. And you can also observe and model the biophysical parameters of the ecosystem. So if you have all this information available, you can really say whether ecosystem is good, biodiversity is good, health of ecosystem good or not. If not, what are the mitigation measures can be taken so that ecosystem becomes robust? And once ecosystem is robust, it will play a great role in ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. And also it will help the nearby communities for ecosystem-based adaptation. Next. Yeah, so the entire aim of getting such information from space technology or the integration of information coming from field and multiple sources that all can be integrated into geospatial platforms. Why the purpose is just to know whether the ecosystem is balanced or not. Why I'm using this word here, this word is very important in current pandemic situation, because if ecosystem is not a balance, there will not be good, dependence or the dynamics between the prey and predators. And that poses the risk that that particular, element of ecosystem can come out of its habitat and can cause the pandemics. So although we have not evaluated to a great extent as of today that whether pandemic and ecosystem have greater role, but definitely now studies are started and there will be definitely some relation between ecosystems and pandemic, and definitely one will understand that if you maintain balance in the ecosystem, then it will take care of on its own so that pandemics outbreaks don't go outside the ecosystem. So, and in order to understand whether ecosystems are balanced or not, understand health of the ecosystems, I think Earth observation provides very, very critical data. Not only data of the today, how ecosystem looks like, but you can go 50 years back. Since 1960s, now the satellite images of different parts of the world are available. They are available in the open source now. So 50 years of this knowledge about Earth, environment, ocean, coastal ecosystem can be used in order to understand how ecosystems have progressed and what is the trend and how we should apply some kind of even the risk reduction within the national heritage sites so that we have better ecosystem and better ecosystem based disaster risk reduction. So this is my response to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravan, specifically for expanding on the concept of eco-DRR. And your mention of the Sendai framework, I think is very relevant. And as you have seen that pandemic-like situations like COVID requires ultimately global cooperation. And I think this framework can provide that kind of a platform. for going ahead in terms of it, getting all the countries together and looking at standard protocols. Thank you. The next, a key panelist joining us today is Dr. Rohit Jigyasu, a conservation architect and risk management professional who is currently project manager at ICROM in Rome. And Dr. Jigyasu has extensive international experience in consultancy, research, and training on disaster risk management of cultural heritage in particular. And he was actually lead author in compiling the UNESCO manual, Managing Disaster Risks for World Heritage. Dr. Jigyasu, given your experience, what would you think are the key priorities for cultural heritage in times of COVID? And how do you think we can prepare for such biohazard risks in the future?
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen because I have just three slides. So if I can. Okay, so. Well, thank you very much. I would first of all really express my gratitude to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my views on this important platform. Well, the current pandemic has impacted cultural heritage sites in many ways, and let me quickly share these with you, what kind of impacts have been. Firstly, due to lockdown, many heritage sites and institutions are facing risks such as that of theft, flooding, fires because of lack of maintenance and monitoring. There is, of course, an economic impact due to loss of revenues from tourism. There is, of course, increasing risks to communities that are living in and around those sites, not only exposing them to infection, but also impacting their livelihoods that are directly and indirectly connected to these sites. This is much more seen in the case of historic cities, and I would like to emphasize that part. For example, in the World Heritage City of Ahmedabad in India, it has been found that the old part of the city, which is actually the designated part, has become a hotspot due to high number of infections compared to other parts of the city, putting lives of residents, including artisans, many of whom are already marginalized and more vulnerable. Needless to say, many aspects of intangible heritage, such as rituals and festivals, have got disrupted due to this pandemic. Now, coming back to the technical aspects of the impacts on cultural heritage sites, it is to be noted that the number of days the virus sticks to various surfaces is still a matter of ongoing research, but for sure, this ranges from a few hours to days, thereby posing risks to those who are maintaining these sites. Several heritage sites have been converted or are in the process of getting converted to temporary alternate uses, such as hospitals, quarantine shelters, or even makeshift shelters for the homeless. The issue is how to adapt these sites and buildings, which are of historic value, with minimal impact on these values. Of course, there are also challenges for reopening these sites after lockdown period and adapting them to the new normal. This would require replanning and reorganization of maintenance and monitoring practices, as well as management of visitors, keeping in mind the new social distancing norms and other requirements to prevent the spread of infection. The economic crisis that is hitting us also calls for need of economically affordable, innovative solutions for maintaining and monitoring our sites. And this has to be really taken into account as the economic crisis is really going to hit us hard, as we all know. Probably we need partnership with local communities even more than ever before. Another matter of concern is how to manage heritage sites in situations of multiple hazards. While the pandemic is on, we have faced earthquake in Croatia and severe cyclone in India and Bangladesh, affecting people's lives, shelters, and also heritage sites and institutions. We already know that the massive impact the cyclone has on many heritage sites, and I now understand that Sundarbans is also impacted very adversely because of this cyclone. In this situation, we need to reconfigure our response and recovery mechanism, taking into account both the requirements of preventing the infection and stabilizing and repairing damaged cultural heritage. Having mentioned these issues, I must say that cultural heritage has already contributed immensely by providing psychosocial support to the communities through virtual concerts, balcony music, bringing forward people's resilience in times of crisis. We also need to recognize efforts of many organizations who are contributing in their own way through innovative use of digital technology. Before I speak about what organizations have been doing, I just want to emphasize again the fact that climate change, urbanization, and epidemics are very closely related. And though we may now have a focus a lot on COVID-19, the epidemic and the pandemic it has become right now, we should never forget that there are underlying causes for this, and we need to address those underlying causes. Otherwise, unfortunately, we'll be facing such similar situations more than ever before. Now, coming back to international organizations such as UNESCO, ICOMOS, and ICCROM have also been making significant contribution in responding to the needs of cultural heritage in crisis situations. I will now briefly mention some of the initiatives that have been taken up at ICCROM. Just a few days after the crisis began to escalate, and we were all confined to our homes, ICCROM launched a declaration and a dedicated page on heritage in times of COVID. With the help of its worldwide alumni network, several tools and tips, resources, and featured stories have been put together for the benefit of heritage custodians at large. We also developed templates for risk and need assessment of heritage sites, museums, as well as intangible heritage. And I'm very happy to say that these templates have now been voluntarily translated into more than 6 languages and are being tailored according to different contexts and needs. We have also been organizing webinars on various aspects related to heritage management in the times of COVID. For example, on how to protect people and their heritage in times of COVID, how to do assessment and monitoring of heritage sites. In fact, just after this webinar, ICCROM will be organizing a webinar which is on how to reopen and readapt cultural heritage sites in the times of COVID. And you're more than welcome to join this webinar, which will take place at 2 p.m. Central European Time. ICCROM will continue to work further to serve the needs of heritage custodians in our member states. ICCROM and IUCN is working on a new knowledge framework, which is actually under the World Heritage Leadership Program, that is actually based on place-based approach that recognizes the interaction between nature and culture for recognition of outstanding universal values and also other values, but also with a focus on people who are the true cultural barriers. Also, I would like to mention that this place-based approach is recognizing ecosystem services as crucial for disaster risk reduction and climate change action. There is a lot to be done as we go through this crisis and successfully emerge from it. The key to this mitigation and preparedness is the key, in fact. We have to be prepared and for the next epidemic that may strike us. Public health must be an important goal of heritage management practice. Fortunately, traditional knowledge embedded in our heritage sites, especially historic cities, cultural landscapes, have a lot to teach us about harmonious living and living with environment for a sustainable and healthy future of human beings. Let us try to rediscover this heritage and let us bring public health discourse in the center of our heritage conservation practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jigyasu, for drawing attention to this serious issue. And we've all seen how cultural heritage sites have been very severely impacted, the people associated with the sites themselves. They've definitely borne the major brunt of the closures that have happened across the world. We hope that this is still only limited and the situation sort of opens up sooner than later. Thank you. In fact, as a corollary to this talk, heritage management planning assumes particular importance in terms of pandemics. Our expert panelist, Dr. Shikha Jain, who is the founder director of Drona, a conservation architect firm, has vast experience in steering conservation projects, developing conservation plans, and preparing nomination dossiers for World Heritage. Dr. Jain, based on your experience, what have you observed about management planning of World Heritage sites in such circumstances? And do you think that there are certain learnings from your experience and the actual sort of operational elements of management planning on site and in this context of pandemics?
Thanks, Neeraj, for that question, and a very good day to everyone. My response in a lot of ways would overlap with what Dr. Rohit Jigyasu has said, because I'm specifically talking about cultural heritage sites. But my role usually is, to be like a conduit between what the advisory bodies have generated as generic guidelines and to funnel that into specific sites, World Heritage sites, where the site manager is executing the work. So from that perspective, I will look at specific cultural heritage sites, and maybe towards the end, I have 3 slides to show you, but otherwise my response is just verbal. As already mentioned by the other panelists, this is probably the first time ever that the living, thriving, and functioning cultural World Heritage sites used by local citizens and visited by millions of tourists across the world have come to a complete standstill for months. In the wake of addressing urgent issues of people's lives, we have yet to tabulate the impact of this pandemic on the outstanding universal value of these sites and its impact on their state of conservation that are directly or indirectly linked to the economy and livelihoods of people living in and around these sites. And with specific reference to the cultural World Heritage sites, because there is a vast range of different types of cultural sites, as we know, monuments, archaeological sites, group of monuments and ensembles, which may probably be easier in terms of managing pandemics. But compared to other larger sites under categories such as roots or historic cities and cultural landscapes, these are more challenging in the post-pandemic scenario. ICCROM has developed a very comprehensive guideline that can be used by site managers across the world for both. First is planning in the lockdown mode, and secondly, in the post-pandemic situation for reopening it. Truly, it is the site managers for these cultural heritage sites that need to play the most critical role regarding prevention and management of the impacts of pandemic. Each site manager needs to customize guidelines such as those set by ICCROM and integrate them in heritage management plans or immediate action plans as per particular requirements of the cultural site depending on its category and its OUV. Each site is unique and has its own set of attributes and OUV and needs to deal with post-pandemic heritage management challenges such as social distancing, sanitation, potential visitor footfall for future sustainable tourism, and even aspects related to livelihoods such as promotion of local products and crafts in their own manner. I know of sites who have already started developing masks created by local in the local traditional textile. So there are ways to incorporate these planning. Considering that the lockdown may continue indefinitely or surface intermittently with outbreaks, it is essential to strategize an immediate action plan for each site to manage such scenarios. Even after the sites open for visitors in next few months, they will have limited tourists at least for one complete year minimum till fall to 2021. And these will largely be locals or domestic tourists from nearby places, as international travel will take some time to recover and may still be limited in the long run. So the cultural sites require a strategy to open in phases and further be prepared for intermittent lockdowns if such a situation arises again. This can be based on a complete review of the state of conservation of their attributes in the post-pandemic situation. The action plan for managing these sites needs to explore 2 aspects. 1, how one deals with the indefinite closure of the site in the lockdown scenario, as it's already mentioned, through virtual visibility, online exhibitions, walkthroughs that have already been started. and at the same time, how to carry out limited monitoring of the attributes through small expert teams who can still access the site in lockdown situation and ensure the protection of attributes. Secondly, one also needs to plan for the reopening of the site with limited footfalls in the post-lockdown phase. And this has to incorporate post-pandemic movement of visitors inside the site with safety and even fiscal strategies based on how sites need to revive their revenues. Specific monitoring checklists for the condition of buildings and spaces, condition of attributes during the lockdown and in the post-pandemic situation needs to be addressed in the management plan as a long-term measure now, because we don't know whether it is the pandemic or it is the beginning of pandemics, or how unsure the future is currently. So we really need to not look at it as a disaster that will go past, but some changes that we need to make completely in our lifestyle and in the way the sites would be managed in future. The sites need to also prepare for adequate footfalls and encourage more visitors by highlighting better safety measures incorporated in the post-lockdown situation. Now I'll just move on to specific sites. It's already been mentioned several times, and by UNESCO ADG also, the quote that culture makes us resilient. And the cultural sites with strongest resilience need to be the World Heritage cities that are dealing with the highest density of human population compared to any other cultural or natural World Heritage site. The cities definitely are the most challenging, and they have already become pandemic epicenters in a number of cases. If we see in India, the two World Heritage City areas of Ahmedabad and Jaipur are epicenters already. And the management challenges in these are very different from other cultural World Heritage sites. In Jaipur, the government is using drone, as you can see in the slide. They are using drone recordings both for monitoring the lockdown within the property area with 15 drones and 800 cameras, roughly in an area of 2 square kilometers. And at the same time, these drone videos provide interesting interpretation of the city in lockdown mode with stay safe awareness messages going to the local people. What is most interesting, can we move to the next slide? Can we move to the next slide? Yeah. What is most interesting is that sometimes the attributes of the site themselves serve as an operational element for site management and control during the pandemic, as we can see in the case of these Jaipur city gates on the slide. Incorporating post-pandemic measures in management of cultural heritage sites will additionally support some of the previous management issues that were yet to be resolved, such as traffic and visitor footfall, that will now need an urgent response because of social distancing and also looking at sustainable tourism in future. Next slide, please. Lastly, I would like to say we can definitely take lessons in management from our cultural landscape categories, which possibly are more safe in the pandemic situation, as we see in the case of Sikkim, which has no cases, the only state in India with no pandemic, with no corona cases. And of course, it houses our mixed site of Kanchenjunga National Park. But here we are looking at traditional management systems in place and a reverence for nature that now other cultural sites need to strongly incorporate as a wider landscape approach in the post-pandemic environment for their management. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your observations, both from on ground as well as conceptually. I think the challenges still remain, and cultural heritage in particular will have to think from a completely different paradigm in the post-pandemic era. I think the earlier we start adapting to it will be better for the people as well as the sites. Okay, ma'am. Now, if we were to travel from the urban landscape all the way to a deep forested natural heritage site, it opens an entirely new dimension for pandemics, specifically related to its source. That most new pandemics have originated through the zoonotic transmission of pathogens from animals to humans. We also heard for the first time almost about a month ago about a tiger in the Bronx Zoo being infected with coronavirus by its human handler. So could there be more such instances, and how high are the risks? I think for this question, Dr. Sonali Ghosh would be the most appropriate person. Dr. Ghosh is an Indian Forest Service officer with more than 20 years of work experience in forest and wildlife conservation in India and is a member on several international panels. She is currently Deputy Inspector General at the Central Zoo Authority, Government of India. And Dr. Ghosh, would you kindly talk us through more about pandemics and wildlife?
Yeah, thank you, Neeraj, and thank you, everyone. Thank you to the speakers before me, and good afternoon to everyone, and especially the listeners who have joined in. At the onset, I congratulate and thank everyone for the timely discussion that we are having. And to save on time and also on my bandwidth, I will switch off my video, but request to play my slides. As we all know that we are celebrating the International Day of Biological Diversity, and it is time for us to pause and ponder on the underlying processes that triggered this ongoing corona pandemic, which is essentially the zoonotic transmission. So I will be speaking about that. Next slide, please. So coronavirus disease is a zoonotic disease, which as per the World Health Organization definition, is any disease or infection that is naturally transmissible from vertebrate animals to humans. Zoonosis may be bacterial, viral, or parasitic, or may involve unconventional agents. Besides being a public health problem, many of the major zoonotic diseases prevent the efficient production of food of animal origin and create obstacles to international trade in animal products. Zoonotic disease, of which COVID-19 is a part, now makes up 60% of emerging infectious diseases in the world, and as expected, is definitely disproportionately affects the poor communities in tropical countries. High human density and the prevalence of biodiversity hotspots makes Asia region particularly vulnerable to the emergence of zoonotic pathogens of wildlife origin. Similarly, some of our iconic species now confined to protected areas involving natural World Heritage sites are also vulnerable to diseases, as they either serve as reservoirs or intermediate hosts of these complex, ever mutating bacteria and viruses. Imagine a disease outbreak and a complete wipeout of a species such as the pygmy hog, the Sumatran orangutan, or the Komodo dragon that is found nowhere else in the world except for these natural heritage sites or protected areas. So it is worrying. Next slide, please. So as we all know, and as there is well-established evidence, that human-induced environment changes have been the primary factor for today's turbulent times. These include deforestation, habitat fragmentation, and an expanding agricultural base that has led to increased contact between humans and other animals, potentially increasing the chance of zoonosis emerging and spreading. Climate change with increased global temperatures and pollution all linked complex manner to the way these new infectious diseases are emerging. Similarly, large-scale hunting of wild animals for food is also a threat which certainly needs more research, but at the same time compels us to think about lifestyle changes, the food that we eat, and the carbon footprint that we create on this planet Earth. Next slide, please. So what can be done? Certainly protected areas and such as national parks, sanctuaries, some of which are iconic natural World Heritage sites, must be preserved and must be part of the global strategy to reduce or prevent future disease episodes. This inclusion of primary natural habitats is already part of DRR strategies, as Dr. Shirish had already mentioned, as part of ECO-DRR. But perhaps there is also time to further expand this definition and include animals or species as part of this DRR, animal inclusive DRR. Species that serve as indicators, species that we can monitor, and the species that help in continuing that delicate balance in complex food webs must be studied. Similarly, we need more research, scientific studies that help us understand the linkages between wild animals, captive animals, include domesticated animals and human health. What environmental and physiological factors trigger disease outbreaks, and how science-based intervention can help mitigate this is the need of the hour. And all is this being discussed under the One Health approach, and perhaps it is time that we further extend this to natural areas and species and help find plausible solutions for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for this alternative and interesting insights. I think we need to keep in mind that animals, whether wild or domesticated, and the relations with human health, as well as the linkages between pandemics, land use changes, and we need to keep these in mind and probably get them also more into the mainstream discussions on disaster risk reduction and management. Next, our penultimate panelist is Mr. Abhineet Jain. He's lead for global industry business development for Maxar Technologies and based in Singapore. Mr. Jain has been active in the remote sensing and photogrammetry industry for the
Neeraj?
Yes. Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, I lost you for a bit, but now
partly.
You're back.
Okay, so basically I'm introducing Mr. Abhineet Jain, who is lead global industry business development for Maxar Technologies, who is based in Singapore. And Mr. Jain has been active in the remote sensing and photogrammetry industry for the last 25 years and has served various roles in technical sales and business development as well. So Mr. Jain, based on the background that you come from, how do you foresee the use of geospatial technological solutions in disaster mitigation in particular? And could you also sort of share with us that how do you think that the private sector can be involved in this in a more sort of meaningful manner?
Perfect. Thank you, Neeraj. Am I okay?
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So as Dr. Shirish Ravan alluded to the role of Earth observation, especially coming from space, in some of the disaster resilience building and ecosystem-based DRR approaches which are emerging now, I think there's never been a time to look at the space technologies in applying to some of the discussion points that we have had in the past 45 minutes or so. So like as the saying goes, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. And adding to that adage, you cannot measure what you cannot see. And what space technologies, where the advancements in the last 50 years coming from Earth observation from space, or communication from space, or weather information collection from space, allow us to see greater and clearer details and develop situational awareness to understand and analyze and manage our heritage in the best possible way. Given the current pandemic situation, it's very interesting when humans cannot go out. Obviously, there would be many positive impacts like clean air, soil, and water, and consequently, we can expect improved, improvement for both humans and nature and wildlife. However, as it was alluded before, the vulnerabilities of these heritage sites from both natural and human-driven influences, be it geopolitical conflicts, human conflicts, coming from poaching or encroachment for agriculture or illegal felling, other production and management challenges coming from fires, flooding, earthquake, there still remains. And we got to be seeing on how best we can use these resources coming from the space side. So Maxar as a leading infrastructure, space infrastructure and Earth intelligence company, we own and operate currently four very high resolution satellites in 30 centimeter to 50 centimeter resolution class. But what we are doing going forward is launching a new constellation that will allow us to collect data at a much more frequent interval, perhaps leading up to 15 times in a day. This would be revolutionary to understand that space technologies can be used in almost like real-time sense to monitor some of the aspects that we are discussing today. Can we move to the second slide? Now, in terms of as a private company and how we operate and partner around the world, we partner with national governments, we partner with global development organizations like World Bank, ADBs, and several UN agencies, to name few. UN-USA is one of the partners. We are part of the UN Charter. Research and academic organizations, NGOs, private corporations, and foundations. We work together to develop and provide geointelligence from some of these technologies for making their decisions. Can we go down to the next one? Continuing on how we operate during a disaster situation like the one we are in currently, we are committed to supporting the humanitarian efforts by providing the critical and actionable information to assist the response efforts. So as part of our open data program and in collaboration with humanitarian partners, some of the UN agencies, we publicly released base maps of nearly 20 affected cities for analyzing the impact on the patterns of life during this pandemic. So on that note, if any of our partners or those who are on the webinar are looking to use the satellite imagery, derive information and share the data, they can contact to opendata@maxar.com, and we are open to such collaborations. Moving on to the next slide, let me share some of our experiences working with these organizations. This is an example coming from partnering with Jane Goodall Institute for mapping a time series of land use and land cover to determine the drivers of changes in the forest. And this information eventually is being used by the local communities in their resource management plans. Moving on to the next slide. This is very interesting. Like I said, we partner with several academic and research, brain trust institutes around the world. This example comes from University of Minnesota. It's a citizen science project to conduct a penguin and seal census in Antarctica. So look, where space technology has moved the needle is from a very traditional mapping from such resources to going down to understanding the dynamics on the ground in a more real-time sense. Moving on, our partnership with the private companies around the world. This example is with a paper and pulp company in Indonesia, where we are collecting radar set data every 24 days at 3-meter resolution for nearly 3 million hectares of their concession area. The effort is to monitor illegal logging within the high carbon stock and high conservation value areas on a monthly basis. So if we move to the next slide, we see some of the outcomes here. So you see a boundary in green color line demarcating the Simbalang National Park on the top right, and below you will see the concession where the plantation monitoring, management, and extraction goes on. And what you're seeing in red polygons are the alerts, aggregated alerts developed in the last 3 years. The most recent alert was developed on March 15. So if we just zoom into one of the sample alert area within the national park area and move to the next slide, you will see a scene from a 30-centimeter resolution imagery from WorldView 3 collected in 2018, 29th of September. Now this alert was developed on 15th of March. Like I said, the alert shows a change of nearly 4 hectares of area. And this is what we see from a post-alert imagery of 2018. So we move on to the next one. we see what has happened to this area where the change has been alerted. So clearly you see, if you move on to the next slide, you will see more in details on the activities going on within this alert area. So there are 2 alert areas where the automated alert system picked up number 1, where a large amount of nearly 4 to 5 hectare of destruction of the, extraction of the forest material is taking place. In the second highlight, where the system did not pick up, but it's close by for us to see what's going on. And there is a stack of the timber piled on here with, some boats around to see, how these may be transported. Going to the next slide, working with the government organizations to develop the monitoring solutions for forest fires. So you are seeing true color imagery, but you don't see much from this imagery. If you move to the next slide, you will see a near infrared color imagery where it's very obvious and clear the impact of the fire on the burning of the forest, and the extent of the burnt area can be mapped very rapidly. Next slide is a slide of the shortwave infrared imagery collected from WorldView 3, and you can see that the shortwave infrared can penetrate the smoke that was not possible in the most traditional images. And here you see the live hotspots, which is a very critical information when you are responding to such events. I have a few more very interesting slides, but in the interest of time, I will hold back going any further, but just alluding to what I wanted to share here is a very interesting research going on in terms of using satellite imagery for monitoring and tracking elephants from the spaces. So these are some of the images that you see on the screen where elephants are holding around a water hole area. And so there is a little bit of AI and machine learning process going on, and then eventually all culminating into a process where we collect all this information to do a predictive analysis on poaching of elephants in Africa. So there is a microsite where if audience wants to go onto this micro website, there is a storyboard that explains what exactly it has we have done for predictive analysis on the poaching side. So let me hand over back to Neeraj. I'm out of my time here at this moment. So if there are other questions, we can come back.
Thank you, Mr. Jain, for dwelling on these space-based technological sort of solutions and opportunities that we have. It does seem that we are yet to unlock the full potential of such highly valuable solutions. And if I may say, I think these solutions are sort of take social distancing to an absolutely another level. You could probably talk of it as interstellar distancing. So maybe we can discuss about these further. And next, and one of our last speakers, but not the least, I would like to introduce Dr. Gautam Talukdar, who is faculty in charge for the Wildlife Institute of India and Category 2 Center under auspices of UNESCO. So Dr. Talukdar has an experience of over 2 decades in the area of landscape ecology and modeling. He served as an expert in both the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, as well as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He's also a member in the IUCN World Commission of Protected Areas. I would like to call upon Dr. Talukdar to share his own take on the implications of climate change and biodiversity loss in the context of COVID-like pandemics. And may I also ask if he could offer any suggestions for society at large to deal with such unprecedented crisis.
Thank you, Neeraj. Hope I am audible to everybody. Since you brought up the topic of climate change and biodiversity, I just want to share that it's about 38 degrees centigrade outside here in Dehradun. And yesterday it was 40, so it's getting pretty hot here in the northern part of India. And welcome to you all for this particular webinar. If we consider what exactly climate change and biodiversity actually have to do with this current situation? To honestly tell you, it's not yet known what exactly triggered the COVID-19 outbreak, but most of the researchers suspect that the virus passed from bats to humans through an unknown intermediary animal, most likely the pangolin. Now, the transmission of diseases from animals to humans is normally known as spillover and is usually the cause for new emerging diseases and novel systems. And serious diseases have spilled over from animals to humans, which include Ebola in Africa, Marburg in Europe, Hendra virus in Australia, Nipah in East Asia. And some have gone and some have lasting global impacts, such as the HIV, AIDS, or the H1N1 swine flu. Now, for a spillover to turn into pandemic, there must be a perfect storm, which means the biodiversity should be there, the climate should be conducive, the time should be appropriate. So, a lot of factors are needed for this disease to turn into pandemic, which at present does not happen quite often. But with the kind of biodiversity loss and the climate change that is happening, the frequency is likely to increase. In fact, if you see the slide which is there on the screen, it says the potential hotspots of virus for about 3,870 mammal species under climate change and land use scenarios for 2020-70. It's basically a modeled output which you see on the screen. And the areas of purple or dark red are the regions where you have got high human population and high, chances of the viruses getting transmitted from animals to humans. And mind you, this is only for mammals. Basically, you can see the entire South Asia region, Africa region, and the South American region, which are all particularly vulnerable to these kind of, disease transmission. And we currently have between 10,000 to 600,000 species of just the mammal viruses, which have the potential to spread in human population. A changing climate and land use drive these geographic shifts in wildlife, producing these novel species assemblages and opportunities for viral sharing, which were previously isolated species. So this is the kind of the global scenario that is there. I actually also want to bring in another concept. If you see the lower right-hand corner of the slide, you will see that I have traced the Amphan. Dr. Mechthild mentioned briefly whether Sundarban is affected, and this super cyclone has just crossed Sundarbans from West Bengal and almost to the north of Bengal currently. The cyclone is happening simultaneously to the current COVID crisis, with multiple crises happening at the same time. It is extremely difficult for people to be evacuated. There is a lockdown, and therefore you don't have adequate staff or personnel who can be deployed to control an additional disaster which occurs during a pandemic. Here I would also come back to the second part of the question which Neeraj mentioned, like what do we have to say to society in general? And basically what we are seeing now, that millions of people have tested positive for COVID-19 and countless more have seen their lifestyles completely transformed as a result of this virus. And it is a reminder that we are a part of nature and not above it. And as I mentioned, if it is coupled with disasters like tropical cyclone of Amphan, then it really gets very, very difficult to control. In fact, I read an article today morning. The Center for Risk Studies at University of Cambridge, Judge Business School, made a consensus projection that a loss of approximately $27 trillion, or about 5.5% of the global GDP, is expected in the next coming 5 years. Obviously, it would impact both the natural as well as the cultural heritage, and as well as directly and indirectly. However, there is always a silver lining, and this crisis has shown us that humans are very, very resilient and can adapt to the drastic measures enforced by different governments all over the globe to overcome crisis. And Dr. Sonali as well as Dr. Abhineet have mentioned that, there is also a lot of clean air, high visibility, low pollution, clean rivers, and reduced footprint, which has been observed within the planet. And specifically within the human inhabited spaces, we are seeing a lot of animal movement. So metaphorically speaking, we can actually say that nature has a means to periodically restore balance in the ecosystem and heal itself. And thus, I believe it's a shared opportunity to rethink and rebuild our relationship with both culture and nature. In this world, the new world and the new normal that we probably may have after the pandemics, I leave you with a thought. Probably we should voluntarily suggest at least a weekly or a monthly lockdown every year. It may actually enable us to heal. This, I thank you all for listening patiently to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gautam, for both your very practical presentation regarding climate change and other mitigating factors for virus transmissions, but also, if I may say, a very philosophical perspective on what pandemic-like situations and closures and lockdowns can have implications, for the nature, society, and the planet in general. Thank you. So we have basically come to an end of this entire round of response by all the speakers on the panel. I think we have had some other audience also on YouTube along with the Zoom. So although we may not have time for taking too many individual questions at this point of time, we'll collate all these questions and share a summary report. But I would like, I think before closing, to ask, I invite Dr. Mechthild Rossler to please provide a few closing comments and before we sort of log out.
Thank you very much. I hope you don't want me to do a summary because that would be very, very difficult. But I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think the webinar was very useful. So I think the webinars are becoming the new normal, and I would like to thank very much our Category 2 Center and all the partners who came in. I think what came out is that we really need to continue such a global collaboration. I was happy to see also another UN institution here to work with different partners and to have robust ecosystems and resilient communities. We need to bring the two actually together. The significance of the natural heritage was pointed out, I think, by all, including to enhance mitigation measures and to develop more disaster resilience. I think we need to include the pandemics into the risk assessments that was mentioned for public health assessments, and to reduce risks from biohazards, as was mentioned, including using the cultural heritage systems, which can be perfectly useful, including intangible heritage, also for the monitoring and addressing the economic crisis with resilient communities who are better in terms of the management of the multiple hazards which can affect both the cultural and the natural heritage. Then what is really needed is more support to site management, also for the assessment and the monitoring, and to readapt to situations. I personally believe that many site managers are very flexible, but this is a new situation, including for the post-lockdown, which was mentioned, and that we need better safety measures, including for the zoonotic diseases, as well as for cities, which are epicenters of the pandemic. Finally, I think what came out of the seminar was also that we need to have new approaches and creative ideas, which are very much welcome, to look at the broader landscape scale, ecosystem scale, and cultural landscape approaches with more data and new technologies. I was very pleased to see that, and to look at nature-based solutions, including animal inclusive DRR, and looking at future lifestyles and scenarios for the future, which Gautam said, we look at 2070 already. I was very pleased to see that, that we also look at the longer term, not only at tomorrow. So many thanks, and happy Biodiversity Day.
Yeah. So thank you very much, ma'am. I think we will take your points and many of the others that have come up over the course of this webinar, and we will prepare a summary discussion report and share with everybody, so that we can have some categories of recommendations that can come out of this webinar. And just a very quick round of gratitude and thanks to the panel of speakers for sharing the thoughts as well as the time. And one cannot appreciate more the involvement of the participants who have been linked here, both through Zoom as well as we live streamed it on YouTube. They make the entire effort worthwhile. And a big cheer for my colleagues at the Category 2 Center and the Institute here, the guidance of our faculty in charge, and of course, the support of the Director, Wildlife Institute of India, for successful conduct of this webinar. And goodbye. Hope this is not the first one, and hope to link up again. Thank you so much.